This episode is brought to you in part by Ariya Norinth. You too can be part of an episode and get every episode 1 week early by going to patreon.com/drunkonwriting. In the last history of writing, we talked about Egyptian hieroglyphs, and I sort of teased that they were the foundation, the ancestor of every modern alphabet, including our very own ABCs. Well, I think it's time I probably explain that because it's a little hard to see the through line, the evolution of this to this. It really might not seem very simple, but evolution rarely is. Welcome to the history of writing. A lot of what we're going to cover today is really conjecture and guesswork, but it's well-educated conjecture and guesswork. And the reason for this is because unlike the hieroglyphs, which were literally carved in stone, a lot of the earliest records that we have been able to find of the evolution of the very earliest alphabet has been found on papyrus. Quick note about papyrus if you don't know what it is. It's a form of paper made from a plant, the papyrus plant, which grows all over the Nile River Valley. Basically, you cut the longer stalks, soak them in water, lay them crisscross-like in a few layers, and then pound them flat. We'll be going over papyrus far more in depth in a later episode of the history of writing. But for now, just know that it's basically paper. It's paper. It's paper. And like paper, it was incredibly fragile. Flooding could hurt it, fire could hurt it. Pretty much everything can hurt it. Used to, and still does. Which is why if you see any examples of papyrus in a museum, especially the ancient ones, they're generally sealed and protected even from artificial lighting. But based on the records that we do have, here's how we kind of figure it went down. By about 2700 BCE or so, Egyptian hieroglyphs had evolved to include some 24 hieroglyphs representing single consonants. These uniliterals, as we call them, they were never intended to be an alphabet. They were just part of the hundreds of hieroglyphs in use at the time. And it's important to note, they were never used to represent the Egyptian language by themselves. They're always combined with other hieroglyphs. So these weren't what you would think of as an alphabet today. But fast forward about another 1,000 years or so to about 1700 BCE, and the Semitic people, which at the time included a whole range of classes, all the way from merchants all the way down to slaves. But the Semitic people living and working in Egypt, they were using a pseudo-alphabetic system that we call now Proto-Sinaitic script. And that was based on those 24 or so older hieroglyphs, those 24 that kind of represented sounds. Now, because they were based on those older hieroglyphs, we can't be sure at this point whether the Semitic people created them or they were created for the Semitic people as sort of like a class. If you go back to the last video, you remember that there were different forms of writing for different classes. So it could have been that this was created for the Semitic people, or it could have been that they created it themselves. Again, the records are a little flimsy because of papyrus. Damn you, papyrus. But regardless of who came up with it, every alphabetic system since, all around the world, has either descended from this or been inspired by one of its offshoots. Now, taking a step back here, remember what I said about the uniliterals? How they represented the sounds of consonants? There were no vowels in this system. So, it's not really a true alphabet. It's called an abjad. That is a system where the reader of the words makes up the vowel sound on their own. So you just have the consonants there, and between the consonants, you come up with the sound of the vowels. There's no symbol for the vowels. Now, after using the ABCs nowadays, and since we were kids, that might seem a little weird, not having a vowel. But let me give you something to consider here. Consider brands like Tumblr, Flickr, and Grindr. Whether the ends of those words are just that R, or if they were an ER, they would still be the same when spoken out loud. The same could be said for something like scribed, or even some of the stage names that have come up recently, like Kashmir or Jameson. So you can kind of see the reasoning there, right? Not including a vowel symbol. You didn't necessarily need a vowel symbol, not always anyway. But we'll get more to that in just a moment. So this vowel-less system, this abjad, the proto-Sinaitic alphabet, as it's called, even though, again, it's not a true alphabet. It's being used by merchants, it's being used by salesmen, it's being used by slaves, and it's spreading. And it very quickly gets picked up by the Canaanites, the Hebrews, and, most importantly, the Phoenicians, with some wiggle room in there about where it went first and to whom. I call the Phoenicians' involvement there very important because it was their version of the script and the abjad system, generally referred to as the Phoenician alphabet, though again, still no vowels, that's typically considered the oldest verified alphabet. Now, that's because this Phoenician alphabet, as well as the Proto-Canaanite alphabet, as well as the Proto-Sinaitic script alphabet, they're pretty much all one and the same alphabet. The symbols are very, very similar to each other, but it was the Phoenicians that sort of expanded their use, advanced their use, and got other cultures to use this script. And like I said, it was picked up very quickly by other cultures. And that's because unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, unlike even cuneiform, the Phoenician alphabet was not based on the meaning of a symbol. It was based on a sound. Meaning, it's pretty easy to wrap your head around that, and it's pretty easy to use that and bend it to any language that you have. You could use this anywhere, for anything, which is why it so easily went from the Phoenicians to others in Asia Minor, to the Arabs, to the Greeks, to the Etruscans, and even to Spain. Taking it a step further, the Aramaic alphabet, which evolved from the Phoenician one, was picked up as the official script of the Persian Empire and is probably the ancestor of every modern alphabet in Asia. How's that for influence, huh? And hey, it's worth noting Arabic, Hebrew, and Syriac, modern day scripts, they're still abjads. There are no true vowels in any of those scripts, any of those alphabets. So this is not just an ancient thing. Abjad's still very much a real thing to the present day. But let's take a step back and go back to, I mentioned the Greeks. We gotta talk the Greeks. Because legend has it that Cadmus, the founder and first king of Thebes, he was the one that brought the Phoenician alphabet to the Greeks. Him being a Phoenician prince and whatnot. By the way, Cadmus's legend, you really should go check it out. I'm not going to go into it here because it really doesn't have much to do with the alphabet. But like every Greek hero, his journey was just something that was incredible. I mean, the guy slayed a water dragon and used its teeth to spawn the nobles of Thebes. I highly recommend checking it out. We're not going to talk about it any further. Let's get back to the alphabet. Now, because vowels were, and still very much are, so important to the Greek language, just try representing the Iliad or the Odyssey without any vowels, why don't you? By about the 8th century BCE, the Greeks had taken the Phoenician alphabet and repurposed some of the symbols for their vowels. They were able to do this because there were consonants within the Phoenician language that the Greeks simply did not use. Yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble bending my mind around that as well. But you know what that means, right? Repurposing those symbols, repurposing these symbols that used to be consonants and making them stand for vowels. That means the Greeks were the ones to introduce their first true alphabet, one with symbols for both consonants and vowels. Which is a little funny given the Greek alphabet and the Phoenician alphabet look pretty much exactly the same, and they're in the same order. With one exception. In a lot of cases, the symbols, which I guess at this point we might as well call letters, when they went to the Greek alphabet, they flipped. Now that's probably because the Phoenicians wrote right to left, while the Greeks decided to do it left to right. A decision that, other than the Aramaic alphabets, has pretty much carried through to the present. Now, why did they switch it up? Why did they change directions? We don't know. Best guess, they probably did not want to smudge ink. I think even back then, the majority of people were right-handed, so it was probably just a logistics thing to go from left to right instead of right to left. You look at the Chinese, they went from top to bottom, same kind of thing. They don't want to smudge, so it's probably that. I don't know. It's also worth noting that because the Greeks used the exact same alphabet as the Phoenicians, there was a bit of a deficiency. You see, the Greeks at the time had 12 vowels in their language, but repurposing all of the consonants that the Greeks didn't use from the Phoenician alphabet still only gave them about 5 or 6, depending on the version of the Greek alphabet that you're using at the time. We'll get more to that in a second. So, what were they supposed to do with all these other sounds that they had, all these other alphabets? Well, they solved this through 2 methods. The first one was digraphs, a combination of 2 letters that make a new sound, such as E and I making A, or I, and O and U making oo, or ow, and modifications like the long O, which became omega, and the soft and hard A, I, and U, Obviously, most of, if not all of these, have made it through to today. I mean, when you look at our language, our letters don't stand for one particular sound. They are flexible. They stand for a whole bunch of different things. But we don't use the Greek alphabet today. And that's because the Greek alphabet, from that original point, it evolved even further. It evolved so much, so fast, that there were several different versions of it being used concurrently very early on, including the Cumaean alphabet, which was used in the Greek colony of Cumaea in southern Italy around the 7th century BCE or so. And from Cumaea, it evolved even further. Into what? Well, into the alphabet that was used by the Romans. The one that even after the fall of Rome would continue to be used to proliferate, to become the base for every language from then on. I am talking, of course, about the Latin alphabet. And we will go very in-depth on that in the next part of the history of writing. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final little bit of information. The first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta. Alpha, beta. Alpha, bet? This has been Drunk on Writing's History of Writing. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Please, comment below. Please follow the YouTube channel. And if you really enjoyed it, head on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting and sign up to watch exclusive videos, get every single episode a week early, and a whole lot more goodies. Until next time, when we continue our conversation about the rise of the alphabet and where the Latin alphabet went from these early stages, cheers and keep on writing.